Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Longform, the podcast produced by Jadaliya. Our inspiration for these discussions is the well known quote by Antonio Gramsci: "The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." I am Bassam Haddad, and together with my co host Mouin, we are exploring this theme with a series of guests whose work has provided valuable insights into these issues. For this episode, we're delighted to be speaking with Hatem Bazian, a truly remarkable model for combining scholarship with the finest advocacy, and much else. We are lucky to have you, Hatem, and I'll introduce you quickly. But first, Kifak, how are you?
I'm doing well. Shukran. Morning, Bassam and Mouin. It's a pleasure to be with you.
The pleasure is
Hala.
all ours, Hatem, and thanks very much for making the time to speak with us.
Yes, on short notice and
Thank
being
you.
very flexible. Shukran. I'll say a couple words about Hatem, but most of but the entire biography or parts of it, or longer parts of it, will be found on Jadaliya on the page for this event. Uh, First, Hatem, again, a warm welcome to Long Conversations. I'm going to read off a little bit of the bio. Forgive me if I don't do the whole thing, but we need to address a
No,
couple of
don't. Just
things.
few lines would be sufficient.
Excellent. Dr. Hatem Bazian is a decolonial Islamic scholar that centers Islam's epistemology in all his work and examines the contemporary world through a global South lens. Hatem Bazian is known as organic intellectual, a term used for scholars who directly connect their work and scholarship to people and not confined to academia's constructed walls of separation. Hatem is an author of 5 books, numerous chapters, peer-reviewed journal articles, hundreds of press articles, and I attest to that since God knows when, and constant academic contributions and engagements across the globe. Dr. Bazian is a leading scholar in the Islamophobia Studies field, having founded the Islamophobia Studies Center, editor-in-chief of the Islamophobia Studies Journal, and co-founder and current president of the International Islamophobia Studies and Research Association. So, with that, Hatem, we will delve into our first question, which we ask of everyone that joins us on this program. And the question is very simply that are we experiencing a transformation or disintegration of the international order, or is this order experiencing yet one more challenge from which it will recover and perhaps emerge stronger than before or return to business as usual?
Well, thank you for hosting me and thank you for this discussion. Uh, just before the pandemic, I actually published my book, Erasing the Human, the collapse of the post-colonial order and the refugee immigration crisis. And I posited in this book is that what we're experiencing is this collapse of this post-colonial order. If it was set post-World War II, with the 1960s being the high point of this birth of the post-colonial order of nation states, where the elites that were nurtured, trained, educated by the colonial order pretty much set up shop in the global South. While the economy, the politics, the social order was still being maintained by the colonial states, continued pillaging the South. That order continued during the Cold War with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And also, I would mention the 1979, both Iranian Revolution and the war in Afghanistan. We begin to get the cracks in this post-colonial order, uh, uh, resulting in direct intervention again by the global South, NATO, the former colonial powers came back. And what we see is actually an expanding footprint across the global South. So the big answer or the main answer will be that we are seeing a transformation. We are seeing a total collapse of the order from 1945, I would say, up to the 90s. And now we are seeing this in front of us at a global scale. the Watson Institute in Brown University just mentioned that since 9/11, the number of individuals killed as a result of the war on terror is about 4.7 million. So this is the direct outcome of this transformation that we are seeing, which is death and destruction being visited upon Arab, Muslim, and global South. If we mention the Congo, if we mention the Senegal, we mention Sudan, Somalia. So it's not only exclusively relative to the Middle East and Palestine in particular, in Gaza, but the transformation of this order that is in front of us, and with it, that we have the possibility of a new world that might emerge. Is still a contingent world, but that's where we are at this particular time.
So your view is that this transformation has been in the works for years, actually decades. And so I'm not going to ask you what we ask several of our other guests who see Gaza as an inflection point. I'm not going to ask you, how does Gaza differ from, Iraq, Afghanistan, and these other major developments. Rather, my question is, what role, if any, does Gaza play in this transformation? Is it just one more blip on the radar? Has it accelerated the transformation? How would you situate it within your perspective?
Well, I do still think that Palestine, Gaza, and the Palestinians are central to this both colonial, post-colonial order. Now, Palestine in general serves to be the colonial in the post-colonial. So as the world moved into the post-coloniality, Palestine was the last colony to be commissioned by the world order. And therefore, it actually continued to travel in the colonial during the period, and also presenting the contradiction in the post-colonial period. And that's the ironic part, as the world was declaring that coloniality is ending, they were actually sponsoring, nurturing, suckling, developing this this colonial state, which is Israel, as a settler colony at a time where direct colonization was completely being either eliminated or transformed into a much more structured order. Now, also in the broader realm, Palestine have always presented this, if you want to say, epistemic challenge, because Israel and settler colonialism in Palestine itself is a Western colonial project from its inception. Zionism adopted Western epistemology, accepted to be a junior partner in the colonial enterprise, and if we actually think about the colonization of Palestine in 1917. So whenever I speak about Palestine, Palestine was colonized in 1917, December 10th, 11th, 1917 by the British. And it was seen, as it was declared by the British press at the time, now comes the end of the Crusades, the front pages and so on. And then the transformation or the incubation of the Zionist project itself is to fit into this notion of millenarianism, this notion, theological distortions of a particular worldview that gets to be adopted in the United States, that the incubation of Israel as a stepping stone toward the second coming. So itself is part of that. So while we're looking at this aspect of the transformation, Palestine is a central focal point, both in terms of the region, which is for us is problematic to say the Middle East, because we're accepting an epistemological colonial term born by the British to dictate and to relate to this area, and then globally, Palestine functions and works in that way. So I do think there is an element that we need to constantly focus on Palestine and also simultaneously think of the global order. Lastly, I would also say the following in relations to the Western post-colonial order, that the Cold War comes to an end in 1991-92, and immediately we get the discussions or the discourse about the clash of civilization. Samuel Huntington thesis, which actually is not his thesis, is Bernard Lewis' thesis that gets to be made popular by Samuel Huntington, first in the World Affairs Journal with a question mark, and later on in a book without the
with an
question
exclamation mark.
Yeah, so meaning that we get into this notions of the clash of civilization, and long and behold, it's the Sino-Islamic threat to Western civilization, and that gets us into migration from the red menace into the green menace as a way to continue to formulate the global hegemonic order in this post-colonial world, to justify a shift and a change in the focus, but not in the foundation of Western intervention, domination, and control. So I think in here, if you get what you call not the patience, but the way to read Bernard Lewis, which I don't, aside from research, there's not much in there, or Samuel Huntington and Fuad Ajami and all these clash of civilization warriors, you'll see that one of the central figures in much of their writing is Palestinian. Like every other page, a Palestinian jump through on you. And this is again to justify the structure of domination for a region that is rich with resources, military intervention, and continued a policy of hegemonic control from the global north, US, NATO, Europe, toward the global south, with the Arab and Muslim world being a central space for the articulation of this policy.
Hatem, I wanted to move on to a specific topic next, Islamophobia, but I want to follow up on something that you said that I also, in class, when we talk about Orientalism, we talk about the, several centuries before the 20th century, where this form of thought or this discourse or structure of thinking became sort of dominant in at least the West, parts of the West that are colonizing most of the world. But you said something about Palestine in particular being the mainstay of people like Bernard Lewis and others. And of course, there are many others. Can you tell us a little bit in terms of like your own research and your own observations? When was this sort of not shift, but this added component of Palestine become ubiquitous? Because when you look at Orientalism, Palestine was considered historically like everything else, but something happened in the 20th century, and I'm assuming it was Zionism that actually first added to the discussion of Orientalism and to that frame of thought, and kind of exponentially expanded its scope and deepened the convictions and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about this process? Because a lot of people sort of may assume that this is how things were, but no, there is something that happened historically that sort of centered Palestine within the question of Orientalism, the clash of civilizations, and so on.
Yeah, well, let me maybe first take you a little bit to a much earlier period, and I will go back all the way to Columbus. All right. Now, somebody was asked, how is Columbus connected to Palestine? Like, that's a stretch. But actually, it's not. Columbus himself, in his journey and his diaries, crossing the Atlantic, in his diary, he says that his project was not really to find an alternative route to India because he wants to get some spices because the European cuisine is lacking any flavor. He actually writes says that the project or his effort to find an alternative route to India is specifically because he heard that the Khan of China, Western China, is pro-Christian, and he will see if he could strike a deal with him in order to launch a crusade from the eastern front of the Muslim world, in the hope that to convert large numbers of people to Christianity. And the second is to try to capture Jerusalem and claim it back to the Western world in his mind. So literally the Columbus journey, and he says that he urged with this collection of massive wealth that it would be put into the project of conquering Jerusalem and to claim it back to the Western world. And there's a whole book on Columbus and the quest for Jerusalem that writes, and a couple of other articles that delves into Columbus' ideas. Now, this notion of the claim of Jerusalem, Western epistemology and Western exceptionalism is really based on two main elements among many, but the two elements is this claim of the heritage of Rome and Greek thought, and the second is the claim of the biblical text and Palestine as the taproot of this Western civilization exceptionalism. The fact that Palestine, Jerusalem, is absent this control means that one major pillar, one major foundation of this is having this lack or a missing component that constructs irredentism relative to Western thought. All right. So what we see is this continued attempt, beginning again with Columbus, but later on as the British succeed in fulfilling. Actually, Columbus said that he will hope to accomplish his task in 3 years, but this opens the colonization of the Western Hemisphere, opens the door with the genocide of the native population to the enslavement of between 15 to 30 million Black Africans that are brought, which 15 to 25% of them are of Muslim background and heritage, and then the circumnavigation across the Good Hope, the Cape of Good Hope, and then the beginning of colonization of India and much of Asia, and then the British managed to colonize Yemen, Egypt. So you have all of this discourse taking place relative to Palestine, and with constant references in there is about Western thought, Western Christianity, which is contradistinction to Eastern Christianity. Again, Eastern Christians are the wrong Christians, and you could talk to both Palestinian Christians, Yemeni Christians, or Egyptians, and so on. They don't factor into this Western Christian exceptionalism that gets to be there. Back to Napoleon, which for Edward Said is the critical point of the emergence of modern Orientalism, or the Orientalism in its specific construction of the image of the Orient. Napoleon himself actually appealed to Eastern Jews to join his effort with the idea of reconstituting Jews in Palestine and trying to provide them a state for the Jewish people. Again, not because of Jews as Jews, but actually as a stepping stone to fulfillment of the rightful exceptional positionality of Western Christianity, even though as they're moving away from Christianity as a social order, they're still epistemologically have a deep-seated belief that their positionality in the world is an exceptional positionality. Moving all the way up to, not to go through a history in this rapid way, but Israel as it emerges as a state, initially it was still seeing whether it's going to be a critical component of Western order or it's going to be in the periphery. And I think the 1967 war in particular brings Israel into a central component of Western hegemonic control, and then through the centrality of both military-industrial complex lobbying, the presence of AIPAC, and the Cold War, both at a global level and then the Cold War in the Arab world, Israel begins to be shaped as a critical component of Western thought, Western dominations, Western hegemony, and with it the full discourse on the media. And there's the whole series of films that gets to be produced, the integration of Israel into the cultural landscape, cultural producers, and so on, that this actually begins to be a critical component of how Zionism in Israel rolls into and becomes a focal point of this. And as we emerge into the post-Cold War, Israel becomes the key ally, with ally between two quotation marks, that is leaned on in order to identify, to train, to counter so-called Islamic political agency. And as such, we are in this current period that we're speak of. In one of the research that we have done on Islamophobia in particular, you will find that almost 70%, plus or minus, of all of the resources to support the Islamophobic organizations, Islamophobic discourses, and so on, comes from pro-Israel sources. And this is with tax returns. And ironic, you'll find supporting Tea Party patriots coming from pro-Israel sources. You'll find support to Geert Wilders in the Netherlands coming from pro-Israel sources. You'll find the right wing in the UK supported by pro-Israel sources. So there is a vested interest in this trajectory of shaping the Orientalism of the past and projected into the Orientalism of the present, with Palestine always being a key component of this discourse.
Thanks for that, Hatem. And we'd now like to turn our focus to Islamophobia. And I'd like to start maybe with two broad questions. The first, as you know, is that the more intense Islamophobia gets, the more its practitioners try to convince us it actually doesn't exist. That it's basically a conspiracy theory put out by the Muslim Brotherhood to take over Europe or whatever. So, can you begin by giving us just a general working definition? What is Islamophobia? Is it simply someone who doesn't believe in the religion, or is it a form of bigotry and racism and discrimination? And secondly, perhaps you could also explain how your own work and center seeks to focus on this.
Yeah. I will maybe offer two short definitions
Please do.
to working definition. The one definition comes from our colleagues in the UK that have contributed to the development of the definition that was adopted by the All Parliamentarian Committee in the UK. This by colleagues in Leeds University, Salman Sayed, and others. It just says Islamophobia is a type of racism that target Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. So literally, it comes into the scope of a type of racism, and it could be compared to real anti-Semitism that targets expression of Jewishness or perceived Jewishness.
So it seeks to racialize Muslims in a sense.
Racialize Muslims. So it's not about religion; it's about
people.
The racialization of Muslims. And this, if we look at the work of Michael O'May, racial formation. So Islamophobia becomes a form of racial formation that individuals are targeted because of their religious identity. And we know in terms of work on racism, individuals could be targeted because of their skin color. Individuals and groups could be targeted because of their linguistic background, ethnic, national origins, and so on. So Islamophobia functions in that way as a type of racism targeting Muslimness or perceived Muslims. So perceived Muslims, for example, post 9/11, the first person to be actually killed was a Sikh in Arizona. Or the person who attacked the Sikh temple in Wisconsin thought that because Sikh wear turbans, he attacked this because thinking that it's a Muslim site. Nobody accuses the racists to be sophisticated and knowing the cultural differences. That's a high order for them. But this is, again, perceived Muslimness gets to be targeted. Another definition, which also I work on and develop, is actually thinking of Islamophobia as a global order that originates in colonialism into post-colonialism, where actually the global order identifies who belongs to the civilized and who actually belongs to the rejected, to ostracized, to be targeted. So thinking of Islamophobia as a form of global order. And in this sense, we could see that post 9/11, if you agree and accept and play along with the Western global order, you are seen to be civilized and so on. And if you are resisting, or if you're objecting, or if you're critiquing, then you are the other. So the good Muslim, bad Muslim. And in this category of good Muslim, bad Muslim, or the civilized and civilized, you could be Muslim and you could be, in essence, in alliance with the global world order. So I say I don't have anything in common between myself and Hosni Mubarak, or me and Sisi, or me or a number of other political personalities that accepts this type of framing. And this is a continuation of this order that shapes us and the other. You are with us or you're with the enemy type of framing. So this is another way to think about Islamophobia and how to define it. Unfortunately, some think that when you are dealing with Islamophobia, you're dealing with Islam per se. Islamophobia is not about debating or discussing or arguing about the specifics of Islam. The history of Islam is open to examination in its all complexities, low points, high points, articulations in different parts of the world. It is about the structure of racializations that occurs. Now, interesting enough, going back to Clash of Civilization book, which, not that I want to promote the book, but in page 20, Huntington says, unless we hate what we are not, we can't love who we are, or we can't, in essence, defend or ascertain who we are. So this becomes the way politics and world order is shaped around using the Muslim as the springboard for articulating Western solidarity at a time where the Cold War ended and there isn't an internal cohesion. And as we see the fragmentation occurring, the economic, neoliberal economic order, the withdrawal of state, the welfare state, and so on. So the Muslim becomes the figure in both an Orientalist way and an Islamophobic way that provides a springboard to create internal solidarity and also rationalize a never-ending war, rationalize continuation of military-industrial complex, providing support for an extension of neoliberal economic order, privatization, and massive pillaging of much of the world, and intervention rationalized in this current period. So that's how Islamophobia gets to be rolled. And Islamophobes say, no, we are having an issue with Islam. Well, if you have an issue with Islam, why would you actually support the invasion of Iraq? Iraq, again, from under Saddam Hussein, not the defense of Saddam Hussein per se, but it's a secular state. So-called Muslim figure was not there. Again, anyone that might look Arab or perceived to be Muslim is a legitimate target. Then we talk about the constant interventions that took place and the massive footprint, military footprint, massive economic footprint that has been articulated using the fear of Islam, using the fear of Muslims as a way to do so. And Islamophobes and the global power hierarchies basically are saying that we are the good guys. We're the good guys in actually torturing people in Abu Ghraib. We're the good guys in torturing people in Bagram. We're the good guys in actually continuing to torture people and keeping them in Guantanamo Bay because we're doing it to save civilization from this literally subhuman enemy that we call and project to be the Muslims. So that's how this order gets to be rolled around Islamophobia.
And then the flip side of that, of course, is the growing and increasingly electorally successful campaign against migration, again by Muslims or perceived Muslims, into the West, and particularly Europe. How does that fit into this scheme that you've just explained?
Well, the discourse in Europe, in particular, using the fear of Muslim, I would say that there's considerable engagement of the pro-Israel forces in order to maintain Europe decisively in the side of Israel with unconditional support. So, Fortress Europe, this notion that of no-fly zone or no-go zone in Europe. This was articulated as a way to try to say that Europe, you need to follow Israel's example, and you need to actually use Israel security, surveillance, all kinds of political isolationist methods, and also to build walls in various countries in Europe in order to maintain the structure of the society in its decisively pro-Israel forces. Now,
Let me,
on the back end,
sorry, Hatem, if I
in
can
the back
interrupt
end,
you.
sure.
I want to interrupt because you raise an important point, and it's a question I've had particularly during the Gaza genocide. Israel and its apologists have traditionally focused very much on promoting anti-Palestinian racism. Then you go, for example, to 1973, and if my memory serves me correctly, there was, of course, constant incitement against Arabs and a huge volume of anti-Arab racism, but I don't remember very much Islamophobia during that period. You go to the past 2 years, and Israel is slaughtering this very comparatively small group of what are they, 10, 15 million Palestinians who it defines as their enemy. And it's, of course, in conflict with parts of the Arab world. But the main form of racism they seem to be promoting is Islamophobia. Can you explain why they're targeting such a broad section of humanity in order to promote a genocide on a very small subset of that group?
And before, sorry, Hatem, I'm trying
Go
not to
ahead.
be too rude by interrupting you again. So let me continue the interruption. Thanks, Mouin, for giving me cover. In relation to Mouin's question, is something that is actually very much part of how we observe the development of this transformation from Arabness to Islam, which I don't know, Hatem, you can tell us because you're chronicling and researching Islamophobia in ways that so many of us like are so far from, in terms of the access and the depth of research. But it seems like the fall of the Soviet Union and the search for another enemy, the search for
Bogeyman.
another menace, which is the
Yeah.
green menace, of course, which didn't work very well per se as Islam, but it worked as Islamists and Islamic terrorists and jihadists and so on. Because in the 80s, I remember, and we are all outing ourselves here, I remember clearly that even in Europe, the word was all these Arabs are coming. I mean, of course, some people would say Muslims, sure, but
Mhm.
even the Economist, the concept or term Eurabia, it wasn't
Yeah.
Yeah.
Islam, it wasn't Euros, whatever
Yeah.
that would
Camus'
be. The,
book again. That's
and then you began to see this transformation in the 1990s, and then it kind of completely became concrete in the 2000s after 9/11. So people who are from Tunis would be addressed in the media, not ubiquitously everywhere, but in most places, as a Muslim,
Hmm.
right? Rather than
Even if
as an
they're
Arab.
Christian.
Yeah,
yeah.
بس يعني exactly. بس يعني the word Arab and even the identity sort of gave way to something else in most places. So I just wanted to add that dimension because I would love to hear your take on it.
Well, let me just say, one is that the Muslim has always been present in there, right? If you think about, let's say, Wretched of the Earth on Fanon, right? The Muslim character identity is there, right? But it took a different shape. Now, how we could account for the shift from an exclusive or a heavy focus on the Arab per se as the focal point for articulation of racism, discrimination, and hegemony into the Muslim. And I think there is important stop points for us to understand of what is occurring. For us to understand that in the Arab world, we did have a Cold War. All right, the Cold War pitted Arab nationalists versus monarchies, and in this Cold War, the monarchies lent themselves or leaned on Islamic identity as a way to try to counter the Arab nationalist states and articulating their notions of a monarchy by saying that this is what's called traditional, this is the foundation of Arab society. I would say that the Arab Cold War was won by the monarchies. And the monarchies, in essence, were dominant in their support of the Western hegemonic order, the United States and NATO. Move fast forward to both the 1979 Iranian Revolution, I think is very important, and the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. This also accelerates the shaping of Muslim political engagement as part of this order. Right? It's the fact of mobilization of the Mujahideen to both confront the Russians in Afghanistan and also confront the Shia order in Iran, or the Shia state in Iran, needed the development of a particular Sunni worldview that was supported by all of the major intelligence services. This was supported by the intelligence services in the Middle East, a CIA operation. In post-1979, if you were in the United States, actually, I just remind people that the United States brought Ayman Zawahiri, who was the second in command of the Al-Qaeda, and brought him on a tour to the United States to recruit people to go to Afghanistan. And they set up a recruitment center in New York. So if you want to go and pick up a gun and be celebrated in the struggle, you actually can go and participate in that. Also, recruitment in Palestinian refugee camps. So, for example, in Jordan, heavy recruitment among the Palestinians, including the Sheikh Abdullah Azzam and his group, convince them to actually, if you take the Palestinians, you go and liberate Afghanistan, you'll get the training, and then you'll be able to come back and liberate Palestine. And they got sold on this, what you call intelligence service project, in order to go through. As the Cold War ends, and the demonization or targeting of the nationalists, socialists, communists in the Arab world, and globally, now we get into a shift that takes place. The Western economy, politics, it's a death economy. It's a military-industrial economy. It's a pernicious economy that is vested in maintaining and extending that order. And I think this shift from Arabness into Muslimness occurs during this period. Part of it as a residue of the Arab Cold War, and part of it is the need for a common enemy to be framed. And long and behold, the opportunity actually takes place immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we get the 1995 Baruch Goldstein murder of the Palestinians in Al-Khalil during the morning prayer of Ramadan in Al-Khalil in Palestine. And the response from the United States, after also a period of conflict, Clinton declares a state of emergency in the United States, just for us to understand that events taking place in Palestine, in Al Khalil, in Tel Aviv, that results in the U.S. declaring a state of emergency. And on following this is the adoption of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act in 1996, signed into law by the United States. This creates the infrastructure of using Islamophobia as a paradigm for policy that extends U.S. global hegemonic order into the post-Cold War, and using the Muslim subject to maintain and extend this order. Fast move to 9/11, post 9/11, then we get the Patriot Act, and now we are living in a world that is shaped by the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996 and also the Patriot Act that reshapes and reconfigures the world system using the Muslim subject as the focal point. So Arabness gets to be elated. So it's no longer about Arabness. It's about Muslimness that needs to be shaped, the discourse around it. In here, also, we get the impact in the Muslim world itself. We have also a Muslim discourses taking place where the Muslim world also begins to shape the good Muslim, the bad Muslim. The good Muslim is basically the one that affirms the state Islam in its all kind of distortion, and the bad Muslim, anyone that is not disagrees, but have a different worldview, somebody that will actually think that Islam has a different role in the society other than what the Emir or the Prince or the King or the President that says with Islam. So that also rolls into the global hegemonic order using the Muslim subject as this fear inducing subject. The Muslim gets to be elated and it's no longer there. And as such, we begin focus on that. I actually increasingly am using that we have Islamophobia Incorporated or Muslim Incorporated. Many people have watched Fear Incorporated or Monsters Incorporated, if we say. Monster Incorporated commodified fear as a way to create the order, to create revenue, and so on. So today, we have the Muslim Incorporated. It's a source of revenue. It's a source where you could have open-ended war. It's a source where sovereignty is no longer have any impact. It's an order where the United States actually increased its military footprint across the world with almost 732 bases around the world and having military operations in 40% of the world. You could actually have drone warfare over Yemen nonstop. You could actually bomb Syria. You could bomb Iraq. You could bomb Libya. You could bomb Somalia. You could bomb Afghanistan. You could bomb in Afghanistan. You could bomb in Pakistan, all being understood that we are dealing with the Muslim Incorporated or Islamophobia Incorporated. And thus, you no longer ask whether there's any foundation for this. It's basically you are trying to go after the cause of challenging Western exceptionalism, Western hegemony, Western domination. And if you do so, then you'll end up in Guantanamo Bay or some other aspect in there. So I think it's very important. Lastly, I would add the following. The Clinton administration Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act is also built upon those who have longer history, the LA 8 case. The LA 8 case, 7 Palestinians and 1 Kenyan gets arrested in 1987 by Reagan administration that was attempting at the time to rewire immigration policy and to use it as a tool for national security, especially to target Latin American activists at the time. And they went after the Palestinian and Kenyan, not because they had any strength, but because they were the weakest part of that political order in the United States, not wanting to take on the Latin American activists. That case gets to be retroactively charged under the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act in 1996, and that makes it to the Supreme Court in 1998 under Janet Reno versus ADC, where we get the ruling that says non-citizen aliens or green card holders in the United States do not enjoy First Amendment rights, do not enjoy the constitutional protection. So literally, the rewiring even of our domestic laws in the United States is directly connected to this shift toward Islamophobia and the demonization, while the Arab is removed from the picture. The Muslim figure gets to be the focal point, but the Palestinian is always there, right? So even as we speak about the Palestinian now becomes Hamas, right? So less about the PLO or PFLP in the discourse, because they were seen as accepting the hegemonic order since the Oslo Agreement. So you also see some of that discourse taking place. I know that's a long answer, but there's just it's so much to unpack in terms of how the Muslim becomes the Muslim Inc. as a subject of fear to rationalize empire. And to rationalize the extension. We are almost at $1 trillion military budget in the United States, where we don't really have a superpower in front of us. All of this actually outlay is to fight the war on terrorism, an open-ended war without any respect for sovereignty, territoriality, invasion of multiple countries, the collapse of multiple states, and so on. And we're living in that moment as we speak.
Thanks, Hatem. Very quickly, the good Muslim, bad Muslim formulation, is it what Mahmoud Mamdani developed, or did someone address these words, particularly in the way they are, said before him? Just a quick, just out of curiosity.
No, his book, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim, he framed it, but you could see this articulation taking place, and now it's taking, both a global north, but also in the Muslim world. So we actually do speak about Islamophobia in Muslim majority states, right? Where that framing is, again, is there and apt to see how that order begins to be the global framing of construction for the politics post 9/11.
This makes you a bad Muslim, Hatem, so be careful.
So
history has always been made by bad people from the power perspective.
It's actually good credit, even to those Muslims who are not actual believers or practitioners. They'd rather be called bad Muslims because they're not comporting with U.S. policy. Before we move on to the question of campus activism, its relation to Islamophobia and funding for anti-Palestinian activism on campus, and so on, and on campus and beyond. Let me ask you to very quickly, we're going to go to the website. Just if you can very quickly introduce us to the website so that we can, let me go here. Okay, there we go. So let me see. So can you tell us, this is the website for the center, Islamophobia Center. And can you tell us a little bit about the website and how people can make use of it, educators, researchers, journalists, and beyond?
Well, Islamophobia Center is a hub for much of the global work on Islamophobia. So, and it's connected to the Islamophobia Studies Journal, which we publish twice a year. So we're right now on volume 9.1, which will be about 17 volumes of the Islamophobia Studies Journal. We're also connected to the International Islamophobia Studies Association with an annual conference, all the scholars from across the world. We just finished our conference in Granada, Spain, just last week. And next year, the conference will be hosted in Malaysia. The year before, we actually went to Bosnia, and the form of Islamophobia was actually comparing genocide. So we compared the Gaza genocide with the genocide in Bosnia, because all of a sudden Europe says, especially as the Ukraine war began, this did not happen in Europe like as a way to frame it, but literally just we had the Bosnian genocide with 300,000 being committed to genocide, and using again this Muslimness as a way to rationalize genocide and engage in it, also covering Russian Islamophobia. The Canadian Islamophobia report that actually looked both at the connection to pro-Israel sources funding and demonization. We do surveys. So that's the hub for a large number of the work connected to the various groups and organizations, with an annual conference, a journal, and specific reports. that actually tries to look at the phenomena in the different settings, whether it's Russia, Canada, United States, India. India has become a major component of the Islamophobia discourse, to the level that the overwhelming majority of internet-produced Islamophobia actually emerges out of India. And this is very interesting because I do think that the alliance between the Hindutva, the PGP party, and Israel has made it possible to use India as a focal point for actually putting out Islamophobic discourse with pot farms, internet sites where actually produce and promote Islamophobic discourses in there. So we did a whole report on bigotry in India and the stoking of bigotry and the role that is played by the PGB and RSS, but also in cooperation with Israel. In the United States and Canada, increasingly we find this convergence between the pro-Israel groupings and organizations, the Hindutva supporting groups and organizations, and also the right-wing Christian evangelicals in alliance and attempting both to target and demonize Muslims and trying to really push them to the margins of the society. And that's what we're experiencing. So people can access much of the material in there.
Bassam,
Yeah, go
before
ahead.
you turn to campus, I did just want to follow up. You've already spoken about it, Hatem, on several occasions.
Sure.
But I'm now thinking of the British Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, recently, when asked about the Gaza genocide, saying basically Israel is fighting a proxy war on behalf of Western civilization or something to that effect. Is it this kind of ideology? Is it this kind of approach that helps explain why Zionist activists, Israel apologists, and so on are increasingly leaning on Islamophobia rather than anti-Arab racism in their propaganda campaigns?
No, I think it's absolutely right to actually think that leaning on Islamophobia is the rationalizing, because Islam is very easily gets to be mobile or anti-Muslim sentiment. Islamophobia have a long array in European both history and imagination. It is not coincidental.
It's the
That
easier
in
common enemy, you're trying to say.
It's the easier economy, but it's also there's a rich repertoire that could be what you call dug up. So, for example, during the Obama period, 2008 initially, but then really 2010 in the United States, Islamophobia gets to be monetized at the ballot box, which is very important. In the UK, it was much earlier. If you actually look at the content of the advertisement in the 2010 election, if you remember, that was the Ground Zero Mosque, right? In the ads, it says wherever Muslims went, they established a victory mosque. And it actually goes back to Cordoba to speak about that the Muslims built a victory mosque in Cordoba, and then it goes to Jerusalem in relation to Al-Aqsa Mosque. So that it literally is using the historical imaginary and stoking fear in order to actually rationalize and present this notion. So Netanyahu visits France and he says that we are fighting a war for Western civilization, right? Now, I'm not going to accuse Netanyahu that he read much of Western civilization, because, even the notion of Judeo-Christian tradition, I'm trying to, I need to scratch my head with multiple hands just to actually understand where this framing.
The highest expression in Auschwitz.
You could also go back. You go back to the Inquisition. You go back to the expulsion from Spain and Portugal. You could actually go to the Crusades, where every Crusader campaign, as they came upon Jewish communities, they completely slaughtered these massacres. You talk about Poland, you talk about Russia, and so on. So this notion of Judeo-Christian tradition unless you have a mental lobotomy, which many actually have engaged in this, that you actually could assert this notion. But it does function that the Western uh, uh, political elite and Western millenarian elites and so on have this notion that they are the custodians of the civilization. There's only one civilization, and that's Western civilization. Everybody else is what you call does not exist. They inhabit the line of non-being and or the subhumanness. So as such, when Netanyahu or the Tory party is saying that they're doing a proxy war, if you accept this notion that there is only one civilization and there's only one true custodian of this notion, then Israel, in its engaging in genocide, is basically legitimately defending this distorted historical trajectory. Adding to this, I don't want to defend Western countries in that way and only blame Israel. The West has continued to engage in genocide all the way up to yesterday. Even post World War II, the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the adoption of the UN Charter, the French killed almost 1.5 million in Algeria while they were signatories on the Fourth Geneva Convention, on the UN Charter, on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, on the Convention on Genocide. Yet they engaged in there. If you think about the Congo, the continued genocide of the Congo. If you think about Rhodesia, it came Zimbabwe, the genocide that took place. If we think about the United States in terms of Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, their engagement in the invasion of Iraq and the complete collapse of the state, when Madeleine Albright, the interview tell her is 500,000 children dying as a result of U.S. sanctions, is the price is worth it? With a straight face, she says the price is worth it. That can only be understood if you are saying that there's only one civilization that needs to be defended against those who don't belong to the category of civilization. So one has to understand the depth of, I don't want to use like a wrong word for it, but it's such a completely distorted notion of both the human society globally and where the West positionality. In this sense, when I speak about colonialism, settler colonialism, I think we need to take account of 7 elements simultaneously. One of it is epistemology. And Western epistemology, in essence, posits itself settler colonialism is to be defended. That's why Macron goes to Algeria and so on, and refuses to apologize and say, we build you school and hospitals. Right? So the epistemology of whose history gets to be articulated and which positionality gets to be articulated. The second, it's a military-industrial complex. Settler colonialism is built upon military-industrial complex, both in terms of the West as well as Israel. It's a capitalist material formation. You cannot speak of settler colonialism without speaking about the massive resources in the Arab and Muslim world, oil, natural gas, but many, many other resources. Speaking about racism, that it is a racial structure that defines who belongs and who doesn't belong, who's the human and who is the subhuman. Fifth, actually, it's a global project. It's not only to be confined to one region or other. It's actually a full order. 6 is actually engaged in genocide as a part of a policy, whether it's in the New World or now in Gaza. And lastly, we have to take account of imperial religion, imperial Christianity, millenarian Christianity. Without understanding these connections, you actually begin to take a singular line and think that is actually one and the only. You have to actually put these 7 in conversation to understand what is taking in Palestine and what is this connection to the world disorder that, again, if Fanon is to be understood, is how to actually think of a new world or a new horizon and what are the things that are needed.
Um, there are so many directions we can take this, and I kind of Also, I'm aware of the time, so I'd like to go explicitly to the next topic, which is the politics on campus, campus activism, the relationship between Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism, and funding for anti-Palestinian racism, as well as how this is manifesting during the genocide in terms of campus repression and the complicity, which actually angers me and so many people a lot, the complicity of university administrators, presidents and other administrators, deans and whatnot, and even, chairs of departments and so on.
Mhm.
Not in being silent. I could potentially excuse those who are silent because they're so scared of saying a word sometimes, even if they actually support Israel, but they want to say something, they won't, because they feel that if they say something against or critique of Israel, that and these are the people that actually historically are either liberal Zionists or what have you. So the silent folks is one thing, but the ones that are actively repressing calls for ending the genocide and actually going after students, as we have seen for the past year and a half, as well as just this week with the MIT and so on, when students are being reprimanded and sanctioned and sort of excommunicated from the university for saying a word about Palestine during the commencement, basically their graduation speech. So, if you can tell us about these linkages between campus activism and campus politics, Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism during this particular context, that would be wonderful. I'll let you feel free to go in any direction you like and
Yeah.
emphasize any details.
Well, for me, the university have always been complicit, not only on Palestine, but across a long history. All right. Uh, Yesterday, the day before yesterday, Harvard agreed to turn a collection of photographs uh, from enslaved Africans, that they continued to hold on this, and we're talking about 2025. They're still holding on that. At UC Berkeley and the state of California, only in 2019, the university actually have agreed to give back a large collection, somewhat of almost 10,000 bones of Native Americans to be actually given appropriate burial. These were held in our anthropological museum. 2018, France, the focal point of civilization, just in joking in this way, agreed to repatriate and give back to Algeria the skulls of 21 Algerian fighters that the French have been holding since post 1832, and these were in the archive, not an archive, but in the basement of the Museum of Man, because it was the practice of the French, whenever they killed an Algerian resistance fighter, they decapitated his head, and they took the head to be displayed or to be held at the museum. So it's literally 2018 that do this. So the university is a central point of reproducing the system, right? And if we think about the departments, whether it's anthropology, sociology, political science, all of these departments have a long history of being vested in both the colonial history and the colonial legacy. And I remember very clearly during the anti-apartheid movement, which was active in, that the university did the same, right? They were actually arresting students. They were preventing them from advocating for boycotting South Africa. The university was actually engaged at the time with constructive engagement, trying to send delegations and engage with South African regime. Now, we do have a qualitative difference today, is that the intensity of targeted Palestinians and pro-Palestinian is built on a long history of surveillance and targeting and engagement of universities in linkages to Israel. So Israel becomes a focal point for our shared research, Israel becomes a focal point for training, for scholarship. For example, in journalism, one graduate fellowship sends graduate students to go to Israel in order to understand how to actually function and report on the Middle East. Israel becomes wedded into our training of security services. Some university departments, police departments send their personnel to be trained by Israel on security, campus security, right? So all these notions comes together at this point. So the surveillance era, post 9/11 era, the targeting and the shaping of campus policy around the Palestine, anti-Palestine, and discrimination in Palestine is very permanent. Another component of this is there is definitely a heavy presence of both Zionist professors and pro-Zionist professors that see themselves in the university, or their role in the university is to strengthen ties with Israel and prevent and silence Palestine voices in this, and this goes back all the way. Even if you think about Edward Said's history, if you think about Joseph Mas'ad, if you think about some of the key figures in academia, Stephen Sheehy, in terms of what Stephen Salaita and what he have faced. So this notion of attempting to try to prevent Palestinian narrative from being there. Now, if I want to actually speak about the trajectory, I do think that the pro-Palestine campus activism is a cumulative outcome of a number of what you call intersections and number of attributaries, beginning with the anti-apartheid movement, Central Solidarity movement, the movement for jobs, peace, and engagement in the U.S., and moving through the Iraq War, the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War, or the second U.S. invasion of Iraq, 9/11, the successive campaigns on Gaza, and then the centrality of Ferguson and the murder of George Floyd. These two, on the Ferguson, it's actually the emergence of Black Lives Matter, and they decided to go into a tour in the occupied territories and begin to actually engage in what I consider to be a Malcolm X worldview, transnationality, of thinking that the Black struggle in America is connected, not in an identical way, but is connected to actually thinking in transnational ways and linking to the Palestine cause. Then you get the George Floyd murder, which I still think is one of the critical epistemic breaks in the Western world that opened the gates onto thinking of colonialism, not as a historical event, but as a continuity. And with it becomes the challenge. I think that the George Floyd becomes an iconoclastic moment at a global level, where the taking down of these statues, challenging university structures and university positionalities, and that's where you get the both counter narrative and counter movement, where pro-Israel forces, right-wing forces in the US and others begin to actually take on a silencing of the George Floyd movement and the Black Lives movement that also gets to be connected to Palestine in a way, in a much more explicit and a much more seamless way as such. So you are seeing this result of it on campus as we speak. And I do think that it's actually as a result of the success rather than failure. I think the attempt to try to silence the students at this point is using all levers of power in order to reconstitute a failed paradigm. The failed paradigm is the Israeli settler colonial paradigm that gets to be shattered much earlier. I think George Floyd shatters this paradigm, and now is trying to reconstitute it through power. And if history serves us well as a point of analysis, is that it will be a total failure. And what we are thinking in relation to Gaza is not only a population that is facing genocide, is actually literally it's at the gate of collapse of this post-colonial order, shattering the myth that there is an order that is treating the world in fairness and equality, that there is such notion that we treat every human being with full dignity, full justice, full equality. And I think Gaza is beginning to break this at the seam, and the university is complicit. It's complicit economically because most of our endowments are invested in these companies, whether at companies that in the US with branches in there or correct companies in there. It's vested in surveillance technology. So it's not coincidental that the university is actually handing out the information. So the information about the graduate students in Colombia are handed by the university itself, by the board of trustees to the university infrastructure. So there is complicity in there. There's complicity in constant cooperation, right? Where our universities have all types of partnership with Israeli universities. The Israeli universities that actually erase Palestinian history, erase Palestinians. Israel is the only place currently in the world where actually books are taken from Palestinians and actually kept in collections and archives that are held by the university. And Israeli universities have been complicit in the genocide even before 1948 with the village files and so on. So there's complicity in that way. Then you actually have to add the complicity in terms of rethinking and continue to assert this hegemonic worldview. Like you get a department says, should we bomb this place or bomb this place, and having an argument as if it's a legitimate question in there. And the revolving door between power and empire and between the academic institutions. Like you, and one day you would be in the Department of Homeland Security, and the next day you actually are leading the UC system as an academic. And one day you are at the World Bank, and the next day you are the president of Colombia. What are the qualifications? What is the notions that, and again, I know that Rashid Khalidi speaks of it as the university turning into a corporation, is much more insidious than a corporation. It is the reproduction of empire, power, neoliberal economics, military-industrial complex, epistemological order in order to train the new practitioners of seeing themselves exceptionally as death and destruction visited upon various parts of the world. And therefore, what the students that are organizing, the students that are coming out, the encampment, the speaking that has taken place, every vote that the students voted on in an open democratic process, it's won the day by over 70%. All supporting PDS, all supporting Palestinian, and being faced by some of the draconian measures that are being there in order to reconstitute a failed paradigm. Now, I don't know who's advising the Israelis. I don't want to give them free advice. But if anyone thought that sending Ben Gavir to come and tour the United States in order to shore up Israel's position, I want to see the genius who actually sat in a PR meeting and thought that this actually would be the new and improved shampoo of settler colonialism in Palestine. That shows me that the level of failure that Israel and many of its practitioners are believing their own propaganda, which is the worst thing that you can do, and then leaning on trying to silence the voices at a time where literally there is an epistemic break that have taken place. And I think they have lost the script of what is occurring at this particular time. And I'm very optimistic, even though we're facing a major draconian period in front of our eyes.
Well, I think it's called drinking your own Kool-Aid after you first laced it with cyanide. But and on that same thought, I mean, these universities are basically now committing collective suicide on the altar of repressing Palestinian activism and repressing opposition to genocide. I mean, we knew from the beginning, that Palestine was, as you said earlier, the weakest link, the canary in a coal mine. Now they want to get rid of all the Chinese students. No one in their right mind is going to invest their life savings and send their son or daughter to an expensive American university without the security that they can actually complete their education. There are multiple other and multiple better options now available. Have we reached the point where we're now looking at the decline of American higher education? because of a determination to repress opposition to genocide?
Well, repressing opposition to genocide, but I think it's accurate to say that the American universities are attempting to realign themselves with the genocide at the expense of the student voices, the faculty voices, and so on. And in this, they literally have completely discredited themselves. The facade of this liberal bastion, the facade of academic freedom. Literally, the UC system right now is actually discussing a policy that they are trying to adopt, where they will begin to take faculty and staff into account for their public engagement outside of their job requirement. Basically, literally, we're talking about almost the Third Reich, crimes of thought outside of your job performance. You know, we can understand that students who don't like what you have to say, they put out what you call their review and they send it to the chair, whatever. Now, your public engagement, which, as far as I know, again, I might be a little bit late, it's unconstitutional, but the Constitution never prevented the demonization and railroading African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans for quite some time. But that's where we are. And I do think that I am very optimistic that we will be experiencing a counter backlash to this current phenomena. And I do think that people are coming out of the woodwork at this as we speak. People that possibly might not have a strong position on Palestine are coming out to defend broader issues and broader notions. And in that, they're beginning to actually confronting Palestine as an issue on a canvas. And I do think, again, the pro-Israel forces with their alignment of Trump are committing a fatal mistake, not giving them any free PR advice. But I do think that they are failing in understanding that attempting to rewire some of the standing pillars, whether it's a free speech, academic freedom, freedom of expression, association, might not be as an easy task to undertake at a time where the American society and also other parts of the Western society is fragmented to the level that they are taken for granted. And I do think that we are in the middle of this shift that is taking place. Added to it, this anti-immigrant sentiment is beginning to actually rub people in the wrong way. Just a couple of days, an ICE raid on an area, the people actually came out chasing ICE agents from there. So that's also is beginning to make some of the linkages in our society. So being guardedly optimistic about where we are and continue to actually work to make transformation. I know that people are fearful, but fear itself is a real commodity, but should not make us immobilize. The fact that they're throwing everything at us, whether it's legal challenges, again, in terms of the lawsuits, in terms of the target of students, in terms of denying or delaying degrees and preventing students from degrees. All these cases are going to be won. And I will actually say in a short period of time, the universities will be apologizing to these students. The university will have to remedy some of these erroneous challenges because they all acted because they got a call from the ADL, JCRC, or the Israeli consulate or ambassador. So they acted without actually looking at their own policies, their own procedures. And I do think we have a very short span of time for all of these legal challenges take place. And I do think that we will get a time where many new buildings and many new projects will be named for Palestinians, both those who lost and been killed during the genocide, but also those who have been turned away from the university. It reminds me of the 1960s, both the free speech movement and the Vietnam, that the university actually literally chased people out of the campuses, denied them their degrees, and it ended up actually naming buildings on their behalf, naming departments, naming all types of places on the campus. And I tell the students that prepare for your name to be on the walls, and those people who actually are chasing you are going to be out of jobs. I actually said that Manoush Shafiq, when she went and cracked the heads of students in Colombia, I said she's not going to be lasting long. She will actually be losing because she came back from Congress empowered. That the political order behind her, call the police, call the New York Police Department, and throw the incumbents out. And she did. 48 hours, 30 other campuses have incumbents coming out. In 2 weeks, there was 135 campuses that built incumbents. So again, power does not understand, or at least those who perceive to think that they have power don't understand the discourteous nature, both of major ideas, major notions, major mobilizations that are taking place. So I'm very optimistic that we will get the day sooner than later where buildings will be named for people who actually were in the forefront of the pro-Palestine work, as well as some of our brothers and sisters that lost their lives in Palestine. Their names will be remembered on college campuses through rewriting history and rewriting narrative.
Hatem, we're coming up on 90 minutes. I wanted to ask you about the center that you are also. I mean, يعني الله يكون معك. You're running a lot of remarkable projects. Palestine Center for Public Policy. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about what the center does and how it connects to what you have been sharing, and also where does it fall in the labyrinth of efforts in this regard, especially today under this particular context of genocide?
Yes. This actually, as the genocide continued to unfold, we found that there is a gap where we have the protests, we have mobilized heavily on campus, on the streets, and so on. We have some advocacy at the national level and political order, but we lack the policy. What are the policies that are needed to be challenged, both in terms of reading existing policies in the books, but also formulating policies to challenge in there, whether it's in the medical education, the surveillance system, thinking of curriculum, and so on. So beginning with this, formulating this Palestine Center for Public Policy, and beginning to think in longer terms, because I do believe that the political shift is going to take place. When the political shift takes place, you need to have policies, studies, and materials that are ready to actually pinpoint to the areas. One of the projects that we're working on is the whole studying at the university level, the whole infrastructure of surveillance, of policing Palestine and Palestinian presence as campus, and so on. So what are the policies that authorize such surveillance? If we watch the attacks in UCLA, what was the orders that were given to the security personnel, the police department at the UCLA, the external private security that were brought in, whether it's Allied Performances or APACs, what were the orders that were given them to allow for almost an assault of 4 to 5 hours on the encampment? What are the policies and so on? What are the policies that actually make seamlessly sharing of intelligence and trying to use face identification of individuals and sharing that, whether it's in external security or other agencies? So that requires for us both to look and dissect these policies that are in place, including calling for a FOIA, Freedom of Information request, in order to identify it, and then how to actually write policies in order to prevent these draconian measures that are being deployed and used. So that's some of the work that's taken place. As far as Palestinian education infrastructure, how to think of Palestinian education infrastructure, higher education has completely been decimated. Really the genocide of our educational infrastructure. So how to begin to think from a university policy level, how to help and reconstruct. So universities have so much strong relations with Israeli universities, which is something that we have in terms of the academic and cultural boycott campaign. But what is the university doing in relations to reconstituting, rehelping, and configuring Palestinian academic institutions, and that requires a policy level engagement and recommendation. So these are where the Palestine Center for Public Policy is actually in there. Our director in it is also connected to the whole development around Palestine. Malak Afani, who was a law student at UC Berkeley, she graduated. She had an offer from a law firm on the first day where the law firm sends out an announcement that she will be starting. The same day they send her a letter that she is fired. So in this sense, we wanted to make sure that our young people who have stepped out and have been courageous, that they are actually not to be left alone. So actually, her engagement in the center is both an important point of challenge and support, but it was also for us to get our young people to think of how they could contribute in ways in relation to public policy. So she's leading the effort at this point with other young people as well in the area of public policy.
I just added the URL, Palestine policy.org. And let me just also move to the other URL, which I apologize, I did not put it online. So I'm doing it right now. So that would be the iphobiacenter.org. I didn't mean to replicate Apple by doing a small lowercase I, but just to make sure that people know it's an I, not an L. There's something wrong with capitalization in the English language of I and L. I don't know if there's a difference
among many other things.
So of course, I mean there are like whole comedy sketches about spelling and so on. Now, before we close, can you let me see, where are we? Before we close, is there can you share with us a few words on what you think would happen or will happen once the genocide subsides, because it has started many decades ago in slow motion, as we say, and it's going to continue. And now we see the West Bank being subjected to, what's likely to come, even more of it. But once the intensity of the killing subsides, and this entire issue will actually begin fading at some level, maybe in the next few months or in the next couple of years, what have you, in the United States, in the media. Can you tell us what might be the fate of some of it? I mean, this is a projection, so I know it's not fair. What might be the fate of all of these rules and regulations and laws that are put in place to constrain, constrict, repress free speech, academic freedom, although I'm not crazy about these terms, that are rights-based, but they are important. And it's the language that a lot of people use. What would be the fate of these measures in retrospect, going forward? Are they likely to be reversed under a different administration, you think? Or are they going to simply be on the books, just like, the legal system in Syria, the economic legal system, which I studied closely in the 1990s? They kept things from the Ottoman times, like all kinds of like legal frameworks piled on top of one another, so you can actually use them when you need to, even if they are no longer current or used. What do you think the fate of these measures will be? Are we going to live with this forever, especially in relation to Palestine? And of course, in relation to Islamophobia and student activism and so on.
Well, the fate of these is really contingent on our ability to organize and structurally undo the structures that have been placed in there. I always say politics is a contact sport, meaning that you have to be in the middle of what is taking place, and you need to understand what needs to be undone, unchanged. We are currently experiencing a rolling back of the critical gains of the civil rights movement in the United States. The civil rights movement made possible for the Civil Rights Act itself to be passed, providing protection and toward designated groups. And we're seeing this being dismantled in front of our eyes. The second was the Immigration Rights Act that ended up the preferences that were granted to Europeans to the exclusion of individuals from the global south, from Asia, from Africa, and bringing to an end the Chinese Exclusion Act. And we see that the fact that they're currently giving the refugee status to South African whites is an indication of where we are. The third is the attempt to dismantle and undo the Voting Rights Act, and whether through the gerrymandering or through the process of making it difficult to register and appear into vote. So those are literally critical components. And the Palestine fits into this topography of these changes that are there. So we need to be very aware of how and what type of engagement we need to be engaged at in order for us to reconfigure and challenge those elements that have been brought, adding to it this surveillance regime, which basically bringing the COINTELPRO of the 1960s into law. COINTELPRO was illegal. Patriot Act, Anti-Terrorism Act, it becomes what you call the legal framing. So what we need is to be doubly as active, if not quadruply as active, in order for us to push back and reconfigure the elements that have been used or weaponized against us in the campuses and in the society. And in this, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but what I would say is the results is directly connected to how much input of work, activism, organizations we do. We have to organize possibly like never before in order to actually mount a sustained challenge to the current period. And I do think it's possible, it's doable, but a number of things have to be in place, including people actually coming into a common frame of agenda in a larger coalition. Arab Muslims, Palestinians were like 1.5% of the American population. So there has to be a larger coalition that agrees on broad stroke agenda item that does not erase Palestine, but actually puts it in conversation. There has to be some critical areas where we forward our work in order to make this challenge. We do have to mount legal challenges like what happened in the earlier period. And we also need a cluster of resources to be deployed in order to do so. If that happens, then I'm very optimistic that we'll be able to make a change.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about very quickly, because I know we should actually close shortly.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of the shift that's taking place in terms of everyone and their mother and aunt and uncle jumping on the bandwagon to decry what's happening in Palestine 20 months on? Those who have actually been either silent or complicit even are trying to sort of get on the right side of history because they're now thinking about the retrospect, right? I mean, there are no illusions. There are no illusions that, the nature of the instrumentality here. There's no illusion about that. And there's a popular view that, hey, this is all BS and it doesn't matter, and this is just face saving. People are protecting themselves, and that's true. But in reality, are we going to experience a time in the future where the genocide is normalized, in your opinion, even in university setting? It's funny, we say even in university settings, instead of
Yeah,
saying even in political party settings, because
yeah,
universities have become an extension of the state. So this is really sad. I actually didn't even intend to say that. It just came to mind. So what do you make of this? And besides the instrumentality and besides the fact that these are the same people who actually helped enable the worst parts
yeah,
so far, assuming that we are, past the worst part, or
yeah,
getting to a close rather than a new start, like a whole new start.
yeah.
Uh,
It just
Notwithstanding the
it
ethnic cleansing that might happen, but can you just tell us what, like, is there any value to this
yeah. It
shift?
reminds me. Literally, I am just completely reminded because I was in the middle of the anti-apartheid movement at the time. I wrote the resolution on the boycott of Coca-Cola on the USSA, United States Students Association, and we managed to have Coca-Cola boycotted across many campuses. We wrote the social responsibility clause at the time, and that became a focal point for campus divestment process. As the shift occurred, and I do think that what we need to take account is the cultural producers in relation to South Africa began to adopt the anti-apartheid theme after the Sun City project and so on. So by the time you get to the early 80s, right, cultural producers began to actually center the ANC, center the African struggles against apartheid. I do think now we are at that moment, right? We're at that moment that the cultural production, right, has already been transformed, right? Uh, Not that you or me have attended the Coachella concert down in Southern California, but one of the constant theme, both among the attendees and from the stage, was Palestine, free Palestine. Same as last year, the concert in London. There's a summer concert for multiple days. It's the same phenomena is the Palestinian flag and the free Palestine from the stage, and the audience actually speaking and promoting a Palestine, free Palestine, and mentioning the genocide. Yesterday in the European soccer championship, the flag that was actually most common among the fans was the Palestinian flag. And then the supporters of especially PSG were also, they marched into the stadium carrying a Palestinian flag and literally speaking of Gaza. This is the phenomenon that you are in, that the cultural landscape and the cultural horizon have already become firmly established on a free Palestine and identification with Gaza in ways that are irreversible. Now, the political elites are recognizing that their positionality is beginning to be weakened by their linking their wagon to Netanyahu and to Israel is no longer tenable, both at the domestic but at the global level. In South Africa's anti-apartheid movement, the same presidents of universities, the same political elite that were literally spoiling support for South Africa for the apartheid, calling the South African ANC activists and so on as terrorists and so on, almost in a short period, they all jumped on the bandwagon. And I remember when Nelson Mandela came and toured, he came to and spoke at the Auckland Coliseum, which I was there, attended. Literally, the same people that were arresting us were there reading and taking photos with Nelson Mandela. Johnny come lately. Again, we were smiling, but this is actually points to where we are at this moment. I would say that we are exactly at that moment of this monumental shift. A tipping point has already been reached, and now it's just a matter of how long would this tipping point last. Is it 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years? But it's irreversible in my mind in terms of what is occurring at a global level. And part of it is the campus, and part of it we're seeing that the political elite positionality is beginning to shift. It might rapidly shift in a shorter period, but I do think that this is what we are witnessing.
I have the scenes from the PSG fans marching and basically speaking about Gaza and Palestine. And the most important thing about this about these chants, because these guys do it everywhere, and they did
Yeah,
it. But the most important part, and the most significant part, is that they're doing it in Germany, which where
yes,
this is
Berlin.
actually illegal, but
Sure.
and it was planned as such because no one in Germany is able to do this and make those same chants about Gaza and genocide. Um,
Yeah.
so that's really something. It also reveals the awareness of people in general, way beyond the you know
Yeah, I think we are at we are very in the middle, if not we already at the tipping point, and it's irreversible in my view, and it's just a matter of how long this tipping point for a different political, social, cultural configuration to occur, where Palestine is the center rather than being in the periphery. But I do feel that this is where we are at, identical to the anti-apartheid movement.
Shukran, Hatem, for your generosity and for all these insights. I've told you before, even before we started the conversation, that
Yes.
we'd love to speak with you on a number of other issues and delve deeper into your own work and research, which you're like you're an anchor, right? In the sense that 10 years ago you were doing this, 20 years ago you were doing this, and 30 years ago you were doing this. And I say this because I was also around watching you and doing similar things. So it's such a pleasure to speak with you. And I know that we're only like
Likewise.
touching the tip of the iceberg. Um, Before we leave, is there anything you'd like to share? Like any last words? And I apologize, but or Mouin also apologizes. He had to attend to an immediate matter, but I guess
Yeah.
we can give him a break.
No, well, thank him, thank Mouin, and thank you, Bassam. It's really a pleasure. But for people to continue to support all these initiatives and all these projects, your contribution in terms of your work, your research, Noura's work and research and contribution, this requires all of us collectively to be as innovative, as creative, as committed in order to bring about transformation. So this is literally, it's not only a village, it's a global community that has to birth the new world that we want to see. And your contribution and everyone else is so critical.
Tislam, thank you so much, and thank you for all the work that you do. We hope to speak with you again, hopefully under better circumstances. We can, a lot of us, even the cynical ones and the pessimistic ones,
Mhm.
are beginning to see the beginning of if not light, but the winding down of the darkness.
Yeah,
Shukran and
inshallah.
salam.
Ma salama.